Um, I guess the images are legible from there. I'll just dive into the images, and the attempt, of course, is to introduce my work to you, primarily the Anyang community and some of our colleagues that I haven't really met before, and hopefully through the work resonate or really reflect on some issues that might be essential to meditate upon in the context of Anyang. I mean, we have been here for a few days, so it will be too pretentious of ourselves and of me to suggest already solutions or ideas that are very punctual. But in a sense, the work that I've been developing in a very particular locale, which is the border between Tijuana and San Diego, between Mexico and the United States. It's a border territory. In a sense, contains much of the issues that is preoccupying, I guess, all of us across the world. And so through an observation of this locality, which has been an important issue for me, hopefully meditate on issues that will be essential in whatever we might be doing here. So the first a series of issues, series of positions that I've been taking in the context of my work at the border, and through them taking you through this cross-section of the territory where I work. It's important. In the first issue, I think, for me would be, let's see if this is changing there, to ground the work on the possibility of radicalizing the locality where we live, to understand it across many different registers. And the first piece that I wanted to share, because it really is a good threshold or really good context to make you understand where I come from, is a piece that I displayed at the last architecture biennial in Venice last summer, called Radicalizing the Local, 60 linear miles of transborder conflict. And in a sense, it was an opportunity I took to cut a cross-section photographically of the territory where I live and work, even though, and I was very quickly should point out, this is the border between U.S. and Mexico, between Tijuana and San Diego. And here I reverse the typical figure ground drawing by making the buildings white and the leftover space black, because I think that the leftover is the place that will recite the informal in the future. But you can see how the density of Tijuana crashes against the wall, against the border, conveying a very different relationship in terms of sprawl and density and so on. And much of my work has been focusing on really understanding emblematically the meaning of this border, but more really working with the communities on both sides of the border. A lot of people have focused on the border itself. I'm interested in understanding the impact of this border in the adjacent communities, and this exercise was really to cut a cross-section, 60 linear miles, 30 miles deep into San Diego, 30 miles deep into Tijuana, and pick up along its way sites of conflict where ecologies collide, maybe top-down development, bottom-up social or ecological networks, and so on. And so quickly, let me take you through that cross-section, which again, I think is an important way of beginning this presentation. So if we begin 30 miles deep into San Diego, we find the conflict, again, is about picking up photographically the drama of how these forces of globalization, this radical locality, this is manifested on in the space itself. So the conflict between top-down development and the topography, as developers are destroying the canyons in the periphery of San Diego to install this cheap project of sprawl in the shape of master plan gated communities. The conflict between large freeway infrastructure and the watershed, as this large infrastructure collides with the natural creeks and watershed systems descending into the ocean. The conflict between gated communities and social life. The conflict between military bases and environmental zones is interesting. In California, the only places where development is interrupted is where the military bases are located. And furthermore, they are designated as environmental zones. This weird overlap between environmental and militarization. Conflict between formal and the informal, as many San Diego neighborhoods have been retrofitted by immigrants. Conflict between two border cities when we arrive to the border, two cities that repel each other as well as they juxtapose invisibly. And as soon as we cross the border, the conflict between the river and the wall itself that collide tangentially. Into Tijuana, the conflict between the informal and natural ecologies Some of the slums collide also with natural ecologies. The conflict between factories and emergency housing in the edges of Tijuana. The conflict between density and sprawl as Tijuana is importing the patterns of development of San Diego. And when we arrive to the other end, the place where the border wall, after traveling miles and miles of the Tijuana territory, finally sinks into the Pacific Ocean. This is the mama of all conflicts, I would suggest, the conflict between the natural and the political. And this is the image that I decided, this space where the wall sinks into the ocean, a very, very surreal space, is the place that I decided to amplify in this 90-foot-long image that Keon Park, in fact, helped me to photograph at this place. 90-foot-long image conveying the drama, of course, of this site, but juxtaposed by this horizon of conflict between these two border cities. And the suggestion, of course, in the end was, I was given the opportunity to put this image on the facade of the U.S. pavilion. It was an amazing treat, you know, before the Bush administration packed its bags, to be able to have as a facade of the U.S. pavilion the most intensive trafficked border in the world, as a way of entering the pavilion, also literally as a threshold, because the exhibition inside really had to do with some of the most alternative practices in the U.S. that were also repositioning themselves, retooling themselves to really face these conditions of conflict and crisis. So the idea that architectural practice and artistic practices ultimately need to reposition themselves in the context of crisis, of conflict, allowing conflict to be an operational tool to redefine intervention is really what was behind this piece. And of course, this also suggests for my own work and to share with you that I live, even though Keon might think that it's a very boring suburban environment at times, but we talk a lot about this, a very interesting laboratory, because no other place in the world I would suggest in such a compressed area, 60 linear miles, we find some of the most relevant issues at stake at this moment in our work. The debates, the struggles, the politics, let's say, of immigration, of labor, of surveillance, the tensions between formal and informal urbanization, the struggles between density and sprawl, and ultimately no other place in the world I would imagine, even though all of these issues are replicated at the scale of our neighborhoods in every city, but here they are dramatized. No other place in the world you would find some of the richest, wealthiest real estate, as the one found in the edges of San Diego, barely 20 minutes away from some of the poorest settlements in Latin America, as the ones found in the edges of Tijuana. So this radical proximity of wealth and poverty, suggesting that urbanization continues to be perpetuated by this weird relationship between enclaves of mega wealth and the rings of poverty, of service sector, that really are needed to maintain those centers of progress. And of course, this conflict is magnified in this wall, this border wall, that ultimately, in my mind, translates or transforms San Diego into the world's largest gated community. And what I'm suggesting is that much of the work, my work really is looking at this border as an emblematic image of the perennial idea of planning as a way of separating social life from physical space, as a way of dividing communities, jurisdictions, fragmenting the territory, and this urbanism